In this lecture, we're going to teleport the player into the next scene. The next scene should be configurable. For the most flexibility, we should have the option to customize the destination. It's possible that our game is not linear. We may want players to skip levels based on conditions. Not all portals should go directly to the next level. In our component, let's add a variable for storing the scene's index. This variable should be configurable from the Unity editor. In your editor, open the portal component. At the top of the file, define an integer variable called nextSceneIndex. Scenes are assigned to indexes. Storing the index will allow us to configure the scene to teleport to. Add the serialized field attribute to the variable. After storing the scene's index, let's load the next scene. In the trigger method, replace the print statement with the sceneTransition.initiate method. If you can recall, we defined this method for handling the transition from one scene to the next. It accepts the index of the scene. Let's pass in the nextSceneIndex variable. There's one more thing I want to do. After the player enters the portal, we should disable the collider component. It's possible that they may end up triggering the portal behavior twice. To prevent that from happening, let's disable the collider component from triggering twice. First, we must store a reference to the component. At the top of the file, define a variable called colliderComponent with the collider class as the type. There's one thing worth mentioning. Unity provides multiple collider components. If you were to look through the list of components, you would find a box collider component and a capsule collider component. Both components use the collider class. When dealing with colliders, you should always use the collider class. Let's grab a reference to the component. Below the variables, define the awake method. Inside this method, set the collider component variable to the getComponentCollider method. Back in the trigger method, we're going to disable the component after the conditional statement. Set the colliderComponent.enabled property to false. All components have the enabled property. By setting it to false, the component's behavior and features are disabled. Thus, the trigger method can't be called twice. We're ready to test our code. Head over to Unity. Before testing the game, we must add our scene to the build. As a reminder, Unity does not automatically bundle a scene with the final build of the game. We must manually register our scenes with the game. Go to the File, Build Settings menu. The main menu and island scenes are registered with our game. Let's add the dungeon scene. A new scene can be added by dragging it into the build window. The scene can be found in the Scenes folder. Drag it into the window. The dungeon scene should have an index of 2. Be sure to memorize the index of your scene. Let's exit the build window. Next, click on the Portal Game object from the hierarchy. In the settings, set the nextSceneIndex field to 2. One more thing, a portal should be available from the dungeon scene. Let's enter the dungeon scene. In this scene, move the scene's camera to the cave's entrance. Drag the portal prefab into the doorway. You may need to use the move or rotate controls to correctly position the portal at the entrance. Make sure that the spawn point object is in front of the entrance, not behind it. Lastly, in the component settings, set the nextSceneIndex field to 1. The dungeon should lead the player back to the island. To test our work, switch back to the island scene. Play the game. I'm going to walk up to the portal. The moment I touch the portal, I'm taken to the dungeon. Vice versa, if I enter the dungeon's entrance, I'm taken back to the island. So far, everything looks good except for one thing. The player is not positioned at the spawn point. Unfortunately, fixing this issue is not so easy. There are different ways to accomplish this task. One of the solutions is to use singletons. Personally, I don't think singletons are bad. However, I think there's a better solution for this case. We should save the player's data. If the player has saved data, we should spawn them at the portal's spawn point. Let's cover saving player data in the next section. I'll see you there.